Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Downline podcast, where we seek to help men and women faithfully walk with Jesus while pouring their lives into others. A real privilege for me today, kind of meeting one of my Christian leader heroes, and Dr. Russell Moore. And Dr. Moore, really thankful you've taken the time to join us.
Oh, glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So would you just take a few minutes and give our Downline community a little bit of your background and kind of what you're up to now and even your role there with Christianity Today?
Well, I'm editor-in-chief at Christianity Today, which is a global media platform founded by Billy Graham in 1956. And so we work in audio, video, written, every kind of content you can imagine, discipleship materials, other things. And I'm a Bible teacher. I teach every week in my local church here in Nashville that I'm in town. We're going through Revelation right now.
Oh, well, yeah, at least you picked an easy one.
That's right. We did Genesis, then Exodus, and then Revelation. So we did first word and last word.
Nice.
So, and my wife, Maria, and I have 5 sons, and that's what we're up to.
5 sons. What are your age ranges?
From 23 to 12.
23 to 12. Okay. Yeah, Shannon and I have 4, but we're 10 down to 4.
Oh, okay. Well, you're in the really busy time.
We are. We're in the busy time, and we need men and women like your family to show us the way, because we get a little lost.
It gets better, I can tell you that.
Well, one of the things that I wanted us to discuss today is, it's no secret that we're in a pretty politically divisive culture in our current, political moment here in America. And one of the things you've written about and spoken on, which has meant so much to me and in my own, formation and walking with Jesus, is really trying to figure out, how do we navigate this time faithfully in ways that avoid tribalism? And I'm picking my words. I'm not, claiming these words for you, but right, there's the spectrum of head in the sand, ostrich approach, and we're going to act like there's not even an election happening. And then there's the far fringes of a really deep-seated fundamentalist approach that is angry with guys like me that we don't tell people that they should all vote conservative and that there's one singular Christian candidate, and there's an upsetting happening in that culture because we're not marrying kind of the whole Christian nationalism point of view. And I found you to be a really insightful leader during these times. And I'd love to spend time today helping our men and women navigate faithfully as they walk with others on how to even think through the current political climate. So maybe we even start there, big picture. How do you, in talking with Christian men and women, help them think biblically about kind of our current cultural moment?
Well, first, you can't really talk about it without diagnosing the problem, and it doesn't have anything to do with politics. Politics is a placeholder here. I mean, politics is about what do we do together to construct a social order, and that means winning sometimes, losing sometimes, compromising, working toward a statecraft. That's not what we're talking about right now. What we're talking about right now is a kind of identity where my side is good, whatever side that is, and your side is wholly evil, and that side is to be completely gone. And what that leads to ultimately is you have this sense of politics almost like a sports team that you identify with, and when they win, you win, and when they lose, you lose, except magnified. And so you have people who are either really exuberant when they win an election and they think, oh, we finally won, or they're completely defeated when they lose. And ultimately that leads to the same place, which is disillusionment, because nobody in a political system ultimately wins, and nobody ultimately loses. So that's a false way of looking at it. What we're looking at with this kind of political idolatry that we have around us right now, whatever kind it manifests itself as, it has as much to do with actual politics as porn does to sex. So if you look at the question of people who are grappling with with porn, one of the first things that they have to really do is to say, why? What is this doing? Why am I vulnerable to this? And in most cases, what I've found is that it's boredom. You have people who they seek out a little hit of what seems like an illusion of life from porn or from some substance or from something else. It doesn't make the situation better, makes it worse, but they're trying to replace something that's gone dead. And I think the same thing is true with this kind of hyper partisan sort of political identity politics. It gives a little jolt of life, it feels like, for a little while for people who are bored and numb. And so the ultimate question is not kind of what do we do with that? I mean, there are a lot of people who are, okay, well, or sometime around late 2023, pastors particularly started saying to me, how do we get through 2024? And I think what they thought I was going to say is, well, do this 6-week sermon series and all of that. And what I would have to say is, there's not a lot you can do about 2024. That's sort of light from distant stars, but you can do a lot about 2034 and start cultivating people as disciples where they start to see there actually is a better way than this.
What are, just to drill down into that, are there some good kind of diagnostic questions? I mean, you mentioned the boredom and numbness, which you could get the root at, why are we bored? And are we not casting a Christ-centered, transcendent vision for life, which honestly making disciples is. We step into the Great Commission and we give away ourselves in ways that hopefully live beyond us and multiply and have this greater effect. But what are some good, just life on life, you think, diagnostic questions to help people really dig in to what you're getting at?
Well, I think it's going to differ a little bit for different people. But I think for most people, it has to be, I found for most people, it's not so much a conversation that you have in a moment where you say, hey, let's look at this, and this in your life. As much as it is, those things are put on the table, and then we kind of contemplate them and think about them over time. And for some people, usually kind of the change moment doesn't really happen until they hit kind of an awareness that this isn't working for me. And I've seen a lot of people where that's been the case with this issue, where people are like, you know what? Why am I always so scared and angry? This isn't really the way I want to live, and this isn't the way that I see Jesus living. And so where's that coming from? And for some people, it's just coming from, we all tend to imitate what we know. And so sometimes you spend a life doing what you think you're supposed to do and kind of reacting in the way you think you're supposed to react until you see a different way. And for some people, it's there's a predisposition. We all have points of vulnerability. And so you have some people who are vulnerable to kind of cowardice and people pleasing. And so they're going to sort of take on and conform to whatever group they're in at any time. And then you got other people who are vulnerable to quarrelsomeness and to having that sense of rage. And so it's going to differ. And a lot of times it takes a good long while to diagnose.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. Do you have any thoughts on, how did we get, I'm 42, right? So I'm younger and I've been in ministry for probably just right around 20 years. For me, obviously, this is the most tense political climate in my 42 years. I don't presume this is, a novelty amongst even American or political history, but how do you think we got to this point where I feel like the church itself got so tribal and divided within itself? There's always kind of been the culture war, us versus them.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like us versus us.
Yeah.
in some moments now. How did we get to this spot?
I think there are a couple reasons. I think one of those is the larger change that has happened in Western society with the rise of social media. Look at Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation.
Yep.
I think his research is really good on this, and I think that has affected a lot of us in a lot of ways. One of those ways being that it gives us this constant fear of exile, because the way social media often works is if you sort of step out there and say something different from whatever ecosystem you have around you on social media, you're going to be kicked out, or at least have the threat of being kicked out. People don't like that. So that exacerbates that, and then it starts to manifest itself in real life. It also gives a platform to extremes, and it's made for extremes. So, I mean, one of the things we've seen with study after study after study is that most people on any given social media platform are actually normies. They're kind of somewhere in the middle, but they don't post. And the reason they don't is because you have these extreme voices that are willing to do and to say anything. And so those folks get quiet. And you can see that happen. I mean, that can happen in a church, because you have one group of people who really do care about unity, and they really do want to kind of be together. And so they just kind of try to ignore some group or factions trying to do something. So that manifests itself in real life. I think that's one of the things that has happened. And then you add to that the kind of trivialization. I mean, I think a lot of it, again, comes back to boredom, where what we expect from, I mean, you're talking about, we've had tense sorts of political moments in American life. We have. I mean, the Jefferson-Adams presidential campaign was really tough, but we haven't had that I can ever think of, at least in a long time, maybe with the exception of the Civil War, this understanding of families or churches that won't. I mean, you didn't have people who weren't able to get together for Christmas because of whether they voted for Adlai Stevenson or Dwight Eisenhower. I mean, that there's a closeness of identity now that's different from what it was. And then the third thing I would say is secularization. And it's not the kind of secularization we were worried about. It's not the secularization on the outside. It's the secularization of us. So you have these categories that the problem is we really don't believe. We really don't believe in those things that matter most, according to what Jesus has said to us. We don't really believe in actual spiritual warfare, which is not against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. And so what do? We take those things and we transfer them. And so something can feel like conviction if it's politically extreme. Then you feel like you're a radical disciple when you're actually just a political extremist. Or you can feel like you're fighting spiritual warfare when you're not fighting demons, you're fighting demonized opponents. And you're not even really fighting. You're just spewing stuff, typing it out. And so it gives that substitute.
You mentioned in an article I read, I wish I remember the name of it, a quote that's really stuck with me. And it was kind of like the exit, maybe Gen Z exit from church or even spiritual backgrounds. And the quote, now I'm just going to paraphrase, I won't get it perfectly right, is it's not actually because of what the church teaches. It's because the younger generation doesn't believe we take it seriously. And that is provided an avenue for disillusionment with Christian faith, is that we've watched mom or dad or grandma or granddad or peer, whatever it may be, say one thing, but genuinely not take it seriously. Do you think that the political landscape is one of the antagonist towards that vision of us. We're taking one thing very seriously, which then causes us to not take what you're talking about, even with Jesus, as seriously as we should.
I think it's one of the two that's the primary aspects of that. And I think because what's going on is it's not, when I say that, I'm not saying that it's because people are upset with hypocrisy in the church. It's always been hypocrisy in the church, and you've always had people who have an idealistic view of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and then they see the reality that we're all sinners, and then are kind of thrown by that. What I mean by that is more. I mean that you're in a moment right now where what a lot of people are asking is this just a means to an end? So is it really just politics? Because if it's just politics, then what happens is not only do you ultimately lose the people who don't agree with the politics, you, in the slightly longer term, also lose the people who agree with the politics. Because if the religion is a means to an end, you can get that end without giving up a Sunday morning. I mean, we saw that in mainline Protestantism with sort of leftist social gospel politics. We're seeing it in evangelicalism with rightist social gospel politics. It all leads to the same place. And not only that, but you have a lot of people who thought, I was talking not long ago to a really conservative Bible church pastor in Texas who is conservative Republican. So is his congregation. They all vote the same way. They all think the same way politically. And then I was talking to a really progressive Episcopal priest in Washington who is a progressive Democrat. So is her congregation. They all agree on all these issues. Both of them were saying the same thing, which is to say their congregations were divided. And they're not divided over who to vote for or, what policies they support. They're divided over what do we make central. And so it's not enough. So the Episcopal priest says, it's not enough that I say Black Lives Matter. It's the question of whether or not I make Black Lives Matter the central dominating theme every single week with the requisite amount of passion. And the pastor was talking about, it's not enough that I kind of embrace Trumpism. It's that I have to make that central to what we're doing here, or else, and I have to prove to be just as outraged by whatever, both of them, we have to be outraged by whatever we're supposed to be outraged by in a way that is at the high enough level, so you can't kind of just bypass it by saying, well, if we all agree, then we're gonna get along.
So there does have to be some way forward, because I hear all the questions now of even, people at our church out here in the Austin area, which I just relocated like 3 months ago. We're planning a church in Dripping Springs, which is like 30 minutes west of Austin. Even back to Memphis, where I was for 12 years with lots of dear friends there, like all the hands going up in the but we care about the sanctity of life, and we care about a biblical view of marriage, and we care great things to be concerned with. Gender is in the way that God designed it. Really big, important questions. So there does have to be a way of faithful engagement that is absent of idolatry. And how have you seen either churches or organizations or pastors or even yourself, the best way to get to that spot?
Well, the question is how do you actually change things? And so if you look at, in the United States of America, every Christian social or political project that came from a position of power ended up being a failure.
Really?
Prohibition, for instance. Short term, you're able to get prohibition passed. Total disaster in a way that actually set back the temperance cause forever. I mean, we'll never see another attempt at any kind of prohibition again. Whether you think that's a good idea or a bad idea, that's what happened. You look at where there actually were those changes that are happening from a Christian perspective, and there are two of them that we can identify. There's some more in England, but in the United States of America, the Baptist commitment to religious liberty in the founding era that actually brought about the First Amendment by persuading people who didn't agree with them that this actually was in the best interest of everybody. And then the Civil Rights Movement did the same thing. That was not speaking from a place of, well, we're the majority and we're going to impose that on you. It's coming in and seeking to persuade the consciences of everyone else. You actually don't want to live the way that you're living right now. Those things actually changed stuff. So when you look at, for instance, look at Ireland. Ireland was once the outlier in Western Europe in terms of pro-life, pro-marriage, deeply, devoutly Catholic country. And now it's the exact reverse. Resiliently pro-choice, resiliently pro-sexual revolution in almost every way. And why? What made the change? It was the loss of credibility of the Roman Catholic Church that previously exercised great political power and was masking a sexual abuse crisis that completely robbed it of its own credibility. That's not winning. And so I think there are a lot of people who, one of the things that kind of alarms people sometimes is they say, well, I feel kind of politically homeless because they say, I don't wholly agree with either of these political parties because we have this sort of drive toward belonging that says we want to be kind of settled in our people.
Yeah.
And what the partisan mind demands is you have to agree with us on everything. And not only that, but when we change, you change on those things. And you have to pretend as though nothing ever changed at all. And so it's alarming for somebody to say sometimes, well, I don't think that either of these parties have everything right. And I don't wholly identify, maybe I identify myself with one or the other, but I don't wholly identify myself with either one of them. And there's a sense of, that's kind of alarming that I'm homeless. Well, that's because those things were never meant to be home. And so that kind of that sense of homelessness is actually a good start to getting us toward what the scripture said we're supposed to be, which is strangers and pilgrims, wayfarers.
Yeah, and there's, I think, more and more being posted now or written about or talked about as far as the theme of exile and how Christians live and how do you thrive in that type of environment. But let me ask you this, because again, hearing voices and objections and everything is, if our country gives us an avenue to vote in things that align with a biblical vision of life, right? And not everything will, certainly, but some things will align with a biblical vision of life. Is it, kind of our required duty as Christians to engage in that? Is there freedom to abstain from a political process altogether? How do you go about processing ideas like that as far as Christian engagement in the public square in things we can vote for? And is it a kind of required Christian duty to do so?
Well, if you think about what you're doing with voting, is you're essentially hiring somebody to act in your behalf. And especially when it comes to the office of president, which has unilateral nuclear power and has outsized cultural imitative power. I mean, for 20 years after JFK, men were putting their hand in their pocket the way he did. You have that imitative cultural shaping power that comes with the presidency, and you have issues that are coming up that are not foreseen. So what you're doing when you're hiring somebody is you're not saying, I want a list of the things that you sign off on. What you want is a certain kind of character and temperament that you would say, I can trust this person to be able to make wise and right and tempered sorts of decisions. If something happens, I can't imagine right now. And so when it comes to the question of, well, do we have a responsibility to engage with that? It depends on what we mean by engage. We have right now a kind of Galatian heresy that says, in order to be a Christian, you have to believe in Jesus Christ and support some political candidate or platform. That's Paul says that's anathema. And a bewitching from the gospel of Jesus Christ. So there are going to be some people who are going to come to a certain conscientious deliberation that says, I'm going to vote for this person even though I don't agree with everything, or I'm going to vote for that person even though I don't agree with everything, but I can trust the character and temperament of this person. You're going to have other people who are going to say, I can't in good conscience vote for either of these candidates, and so I'm voting for a third party candidate or I'm abstaining. I don't have any adjudication of anybody's consciences on any of those things. I mean, I think that's kind of a Romans 14 kind of thing. I make my decisions and carry those out, but I wouldn't impose that on somebody else. What I would say is, it's kind of like when you're living in a time of political idolatry. It's kind of like, you're sending some group to evangelize people in the honky tonk down the road, in the nightclub. You want to do that. You don't want to send the recovering alcoholics to do that. Doesn't mean that they're any less Christian. Doesn't mean that they don't have any fewer gifts to give to the church. But it means that's not a place for them to be. And so the people who ought to be the most engaged right now politically are the people who have the lowest stakes for politics, not the people who have the highest. So when somebody comes to me and says, should I run for office, or should I serve on my county political party or something like that, I'll always spend some time trying to find out, if this is the kind of person for whom losing an election is an existential threat, you should stay far, far, far away from it. If you're the kind of person who says, yeah, I mean, I can serve and am happy to serve, but it's not my whole life, then those are the kind of people we need more of.
Sure.
Problem is we're right now ending up with the reverse of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and if you want to be, make sure everybody doesn't like you, be that third party person, then both sides think you're wasting your vote.
Yeah,
everybody angry.
Well, yeah, and here's what I would say is, and I'm not saying you ought to vote major party or vote third party at all. I would say what I wouldn't say to everybody is, well, you're wasting your vote, because there are circumstances where that kind of protest abstention actually has changed the results of elections. I mean, Roy Moore is not a U.S. Senator from Alabama because there were a lot of people who said, I can't vote for either of these people. And they didn't. Now, people can have different views about that and that outcome, but it did make a difference.
Sure.
So I wouldn't always say that that's the case. But even if it is, I would say you deliberate and work through that with your own conscience without some kind of external imposition on you.
Mm-hmm. We're coming on the half-hour mark. Maybe we could end with this. You mentioned a phrase earlier about the way things actually change. And even, being familiar with stuff all the way back from Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission and your writings, and knowing how near and dear to you, moral and ethical realities of our culture are. And so many, Christians are concerned about things like abortion and gender identity. And how do you exhort us in some faithful directions if you really want to bring about change in these areas? Because I do think the Christian voice has been diminished in the social space, and we have lost some of it. We came by honestly, some credibility in the public sphere as well. Maybe let's close with, what are your words to those that go, I really do want to see change?
Well, I think the main thing is, first of all, to maintain your own Christian witness and integrity. You're not going to be able to persuade anybody as a political hack. What you can do is you can cobble together just enough already agreeing with you, angry people to do something for a little while, and then you end up actually making the situation worse. Maintain your own integrity, your own independence, your own conscience, your own witness, and learn how to actually persuade people, to show them. And that means spending time knowing where the real problems are. Why are these things happening? Which means you have to be able to, what they call a steel man argument. You have to be able to understand the story that other people are telling themselves about something. If you don't, if we assume that, people who disagree with us are supervillains in a lair, then we're never going to be able to actually make any change, because we don't understand we're not even talking to them. You have to have a way of saying, okay, what with this viewpoint that I'm wanting to talk about, what is the person who disagrees with me? How are they telling this story in their own minds to be able to engage with them? And I think one of the reasons that we're not able to do that very well as Christians right now actually has nothing to do with politics. It's the fact that we've overreacted to the kind of hyper-programmed evangelism training of the last generation, and so we've kind of left people without the sort of framework and ability to talk to their neighbors about the gospel. Because if you learn how to do that, then what you're doing is you eventually learn, I have to be able to actually know my neighbor, and I have to actually believe it is possible for my neighbor to be persuaded, and I have to see myself as somebody who is a common sinner with that person.
Yeah, that's really good.
And that changes the framework.
For sure. And love them enough to overlook the things that would otherwise have made me angry, because I care more about their soul than about their, political identification.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember we were evangelizing these kids when I was a youth pastor who'd never been in a church before. Never. And, they're marijuana smoking, they're doing all this stuff. And one of them showed up in the sanctuary wearing a ball cap. And one of our deacons was just really upset and is over there telling me, you can't wear a hat inside the church. And I was like, hey, look, that's the least of his problems. We can worry about his ball cap later on. This deacon said, you know what, that's right. And we learned how to do that. And I think we've lost it.
Well, again, so thankful for your time. I know your schedule is demanding. This is going to bless a lot of people, I think. So thanks again. And I really appreciate your contribution to Downline.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.